and we were talking about creating authentic belonging at your institution with Dr. Nunn. So thank you so much for joining.
Yeah, thanks for having me here.
Yeah. So why did we bring on Dr. Nunn? Well, this time of year is peak planning season for welcome weekend. If you haven't already planned out your orientation sessions and done all those things, you are rushing to complete that right now. And it's important that we create the right conditions for people and for students to succeed, and belonging plays an important role in that. So Lisa, can you talk about your academic experience and you studying belonging, and we'll start the conversation from there.
Yeah, great. Thank you. So I am a cultural sociologist and I'm an organization scholar. I work at the University of San Diego in the sociology department, and I'm also currently the director for our teaching and learning center, which we call the Center for Educational Excellence. So that's where I'm at, and a little bit about what I do. But what I've been studying most recently is college students' sense of belonging. And I've been studying students for a long time, studying student identities, studying students' experiences in school as they receive messages about what it means to be successful, as they navigate their own. My first book was on high school students, as they navigate their own high school or their own college and start to understand how this place, how this campus culture, how these people in this institution define success and define successful people. And so how, essentially how it feels to be a student, how our identities, our sense of selves are affected by the school environments that we navigate through, and, how all that matters for our life outcomes and also our well-being while we're in school. So that's kind of what I'm up to.
Fantastic. So why did you start studying belonging? Like, what was the impetus for all this?
Yeah, actually it came on the heels of that first book I just mentioned, which was studying high school students and their understandings of what a successful student is, and how three different high schools have, the three in my study had three very different definitions of success. And at one school, the wisdom at that school was, it is all about effort. You have to do your work, you have to turn it in, you have to follow the instructions of the teacher, and that is how you get good grades. That is how you build a future toward college. And then at another school, hard work matters, right? But at that school, the wisdom about success was very much, you have to work hard, but it's not just hard work. You have to be smart. You have to be, your intellect really matters for how successful you can be. And also, you can't just like work hard. You have to be this creative, curious person who takes initiative in their work, right? These very different ideas about what a successful student looks like. And I looked into or thought hard about how these different attitudes, different cultural ideas about success at different high schools matter for students as they apply to college, and as they kind of chart their college futures. And I wondered a lot, what would it feel like if students from each of these three schools sat side by side at college, having these very different ideas about what it takes to be successful academically? What would that feel like? What would that feel like for them, right? How would students from these different cultural histories, so to speak, from their schooling years in high school, how would that play out in their college lives? And that kind of got me on the journey of thinking hard about first year students, first generation college students entering this space of college and navigating. For some, everything feels new. And for others, a lot of it feels already kind of familiar. And it just kind of led me right to the door of belonging, right? This is the heart of it. Do I feel like I belong in college? Do I feel like I belong on this campus? That's the heart of the experience of making that transition to college and just navigating the academics, but all the rest of it at the same time.
Right. So how has your outlook on belonging changed as you evolved from, being a new faculty member to now full professor, researcher, somebody who's doing this almost full time?
Yeah. Well, I've read a lot and learned a lot about what belonging means and how communities work, right? I'm a sociologist, so how do groups of people hold together as a community, as a group with a shared sense of identity? And I think the big transition for me along this um, is something that I kind of take folks to task for in the book, College Belonging. And that's this understanding of the difference between the difference between fitting in and authentic belonging. And I give a lot of credit actually to Brene Brown for the articulating the difference between fitting in and belonging. But I'll say it here, and it matches really well what you just asked me, like how has my own perspective changed over time? I think as a student, as a new faculty member, kind of coming into my own as a researcher, a scholar, a teacher. Right now I'm full professor. I've come a long way, but I think it was really clear to me what I had to do to fit in, or what I thought I had to do to fit in, what I had to change or modify or morph or crunch or expand about myself in order to feel like I fit as a student at the undergraduate and then the graduate program as a new faculty member, right? Who I thought I had to be in order to match or to be acceptable to this community of folks that I wanted to be a part of. And studying sociology, and I'll talk about this theory here in a sec, if you like, but studying this stuff more closely from a sociological perspective really helped me understand that authentic belonging is when the community that I'm a part of embraces me for who I am, all of me, all parts of me, and maybe teaches me and helps me, guide me to aspire to be a member of this community, holding on to all of the values and goals and hopes and dreams of this particular community. But that it's not about me hiding parts of myself or shifting or morphing or wearing the right clothes or whatever it is, but it's about being made to feel like I'm a part of this.
So going a little off script and asking, how much of that responsibility is on the student when they are touring a campus to sort of self-identify that versus the institution, portraying that?
Yeah. Well, let me answer that this way. In my interviews with first year college students, I talked to students at two different campuses, two very different kinds of campuses. And I talked to continuing generation students one of whose parents or both parents had gone to college, completed a 4-year degree, and first generation college students who neither parent had completed a 4-year degree. And what I heard from them is that continuing generation students had this sense that they needed to figure out whether or not they thought they might be able to belong here when they were touring college campuses before, admissions or accepting final offers. So they were on the lookout for that. They had their feelers out, right? Is this a place where I feel good, where I feel at home, where I feel like I could belong? And for most of the first gen students in my study on both campuses, that wasn't what was on their mind when they were making their decision. The financial package was often number one, and a close number two was how far away from home is this place, right? How the distance from home and the financial package tended to be the top two in that order. Financial first, distance from home second for most students. And they weren't really, they were thinking about college as college, right? And different schools are different schools, I guess, but college is college, and you pick where to go based on these very, I want to say obvious, but they're not obvious, but okay, very obvious, like markers, right? Measurable things. And figuring out whether or not they might belong here was something that they really started to think about on the first day of school when they showed up for welcome weekend.
Wow. And I noticed in your research, you talked about particularly the first gen students, it seemed like they had a tougher time identifying their particular group compared to continuing gen. For continuing gen, it seemed like, oh, I was always meant to be at this institution. It feels really welcoming. Do you mind talking about that?
Yeah, there are a lot of layers to that, but you just summarized it exactly right. A lot, not all, of course, but a lot of continuing gen students, the lives that they've lived all the way up until college, including a lot of the educational kind of academic expectations, but educational experiences, the kind of clubs or groups or field trips that their schools might have gone on. It's pretty similar to what they found at college. And certainly some of that was them selecting colleges that match, that felt where they felt at home, that kind of matched their experiences. So certainly there is some of that. But for a lot of first gen students, college, everything, the academic expectations, but also a lot of the dynamics and the social dynamics, but also, all the things that their classmates or dorm hall mates might be doing that costs more money than they might have in their pocket to be able to spend on a Friday night or whatever it is. It's all kind of new. And so what I describe in the book are first gen students. Much more often, they feel like they're like scrambling to try this group and try to be friends with these people and show up for that orgs meeting and do this, and none of it quite feels good or familiar or right. And this group is, kind of shutting the door in their face. They're not going to feel that welcome. And this other group just doesn't quite feel right. And this other thing, they can't even afford the dues. And right, there's just all of these like, exhausting attempts to find their place, which is what their school is telling them they're supposed to do. Right. Hey, welcome to campus. Get out there, find your place, find your people, find your group, find your team, find your org, find your friends. We've got a plethora of student orgs for you to join. We have club activities every night of the week. And there's this clear sense to students that it's their job to get out there and find where they fit in, find where they fit, find where they click, find their people. And for continuing gen students who already, feel a sense of ease navigating these spaces and these worlds, it's not as complicated. It's maybe not super straightforward for every single person, right? But it's less, it's less of an obstacle course. Right. And for first gen students, again, not everyone the same, but as a pattern, boy, they just have a lot more false starts and missteps and trying this and trying that and feeling the whole time that because they haven't found their place, it's their own damn fault. Because the school and the whole world seems to believe that it's your job to get out there and find where you fit. And when the school isn't a place that is made for you, it's a lot harder to find a fit.
Right. So reading between the lines, it sounds like then it's not just the student life team or the orientation team or admissions' job to create a sense of belonging. It's really culturally the entire institution.
Yeah, no, that's right. I would say, again, I'm a sociologist, so this is no surprise that this perhaps is my perspective, but I would say that it happens on multiple levels at the same time, but the two big ones, right? This offering of belonging, this extension of belonging, we need the institutional leadership to create programs and structures and offerings and opportunities for students to find a home on campus or find many homes on campus, feel at home maybe everywhere they go. And we need that to be created at the structural level and maintained. And we need that leadership to be able to continually be evaluating who are our students, what do they need, what are they telling us that they want, right? Continually figuring out what that recipe is for this year and, maybe different from last year, maybe different from next year. So we need that at the structural level, at the leadership level. But belonging also happens, it's not just a top-down thing, or it's not just a structure. We need that, but it happens in between people. Maybe this is a good time for me to share a little bit about the larger theory that I draw on. But in a nutshell, first, we have to be made to feel like the people in this group, whatever group it is, whether it's a team or a school or a neighborhood or a family or a church, right? We need to be made to feel like the people in this group want us around, that they like us, that if we don't show up to the next meeting or class, that we'll be missed and they'll be worried and they'll wonder how we are or where we are, right? We need to be made to feel like we're a part of things and that we're valued. And that happens interpersonally, right? In between people. As Emil Durkheim, the sociologist that I'm drawing these ideas from, he describes it as a collectivity, right? Society is a collective, a community is a collective, a family is a collective, a school is a collective, a church, right? All of these different kinds of sizes and shapes of communities that we might be a part of. It's a collective, and the collective, not exactly at the individual level, but as a collective, the group does the work of integrating each member and morally regulating each member. So what that means for this theory, this classical sociological theorist, Emil Durkheim, who was writing in the late 1800s, early 1900s. So these ideas have been around for a while, and we may think that we want to reshape them a little bit to fit our modern ideas about how the world works. But his theory about how this goes is that the community, right, the collective, has to integrate its members, make them feel like they are a part of things, make them feel like, again, if they don't show up, they would be missed, make them feel like the gifts and the talents and the quirks of their personality are things that are wanted by the group, right? And also to do the work of regulating. He calls it moral regulation. Sometimes he calls it the spirit of discipline. But the idea is that the group communicates clearly to each member who we are. We are this group. We believe in this. We don't believe in that. We treat people this way. We value these things. We share a moral compass. And here's the regulation part, right? And you have to live up to our standards and expectations to be a part of us. If I see you treating someone in a way that we do not treat other people, I'm not going to be quiet about that. I'm going to remind you who we are and what we stand for and what it means to be a member of this, again, family, school, church, sports team, whatever the community is, friendship circle. We don't laugh at those kinds of jokes. We don't treat people that way, right? We hold each other accountable to the moral compass that is shared. And this inspires a feeling of membership, right? I feel like I'm a part of this group, partly because I'm integrated. People make me feel like I'm wanted and valued when I'm around, and they want me to be around. And also that I belong to this group because I believe what they believe. And I don't call them they, I call them we. I believe what we believe, right? So it's these two dynamics that really allow, according to this theory by Durkheim, a group of just individual people to feel like a group, to feel like a collectivity, to feel like a community. And the magic for that is interaction. Right? We have to interact with one another to make this happen. And that's where it's like two things at once, right? It's the collective level, but then it's also individual people participating in this. So if I'm a good community member, I do this work, integrating and regulating the folks in my community. And if I'm a good community member, I let them do it to me as well, right? I respond when someone tells me I'm out of line. I live up to the expectation that when it's my colleague's birthday, I do X, Y, and Z, because that's what we do for colleagues in this department on their birthday, right? I live up to it.
Very good. So you've talked about leadership, you've talked about structure, you've talked about those interactions. So if we gave Dr. Lisa Nunn the ability to design your ideal orientation welcome weekend, first semester and beyond, like what would that look like?
That's such a great question. And I don't know how much you're going to like my answer because as a faculty member, I just can't help but to, and even doing this research, right, at these two schools, talking to brand new college students, I'm just in awe of all of the things that campuses do to really put out a welcome weekend and maybe orientate pre-orientation events throughout the summer, and to really constantly be strategizing for how to bring students in and welcome them and make them feel connected. And I have to say that when I interviewed students, overwhelmingly, they were delighted with how they felt when they arrived, and welcome weekend. Many of them found friends in the first hours of college, let alone the first days of college. So where I have something to add, right? I think all that's going great. And I'm not dialed in enough to all the details to offer any meaningful critique or insights there, except to acknowledge that the magic here happens when a campus knows its own self and knows its own students and is, tailoring what they're doing and what they're offering to best practices and the actual group in front of them, right? But okay, so what I found in talking to students at different moments along their first couple of years is that a lot of students, it's like week 8 or week 9 of their first semester where they feel a little trapped in those friendship groups that they made, these hard and fast friendships that they made in the early moments of college. They don't know how to expand. They feel like they're going to hurt the feelings of the people that they've been spending every single breakfast, lunch, and dinner with if they make a new friend. But then they also feel like, I can't make a new friend because everyone else is already dialed in to, they use, kind of aggressive language. I can't break into a new group. I can't bust out of this, right? They feel a little trapped. So if you left it up to me to design things, I would leave welcome weekend. I think we're doing great. But then build in other structured opportunities, explicitly telling students, hey, we know that you're by this time in your first semester, you might be ready for some new things, expand yourself, ways to meet new people, maybe not advertise it as a way to ditch friends that you no longer feel are, the BFFs you were hoping and dreaming that they would be in day 1 and week 1, but to find meaningful ways for students to branch out, explore new friendships and new parts of themselves along the way, critically right around week 8 or so.
Is there a reason week 8 developmentally is that milestone?
I don't know, but I just know that it was a recurring thing. Week 8, week 9, week 10, right? Somewhere in there. It's different semesters are different, right, organized differently, but definitely in the 2 schools that I was at, before they left for Thanksgiving break, they were feeling it and they talked about it later, right? They were feeling it by then. And I think it has something to do with needing those friendships to just even get started in the first weeks of college. But then you're comfortable, right? You get comfortable, you get the hang of things, and you've got these people, and now you feel good. And having those friendships builds your confidence and your comfort, but then you're ready for something else,
right,
somewhere after you get comfortable.
Gotcha. Well, I think this is a good opportunity for our audience. If you have any questions, ideas you'd like to share. I know, Jess, I believe we have a question that came in already, if you don't mind relaying it and asking.
Of course. So we had Michael submit this question ahead of time. He asked, how do you approach suggesting belonging strategies to students of a very different cultural background from yourself in a way that they trust will work for them in light of their identities? Very good question.
Yeah. So I think there's 2 ways to read for me to hear. There are 2 ways that I'm hearing that question. So I'll kind of try to touch on both and hopefully answer it as it was intended. So one, offering belonging strategies, as in I'm doing the offering of belonging, right? One of the big things that I'm trying to drive home with my research and talking about my research is that we, right, the faculty, the staff, fellow students, we are the community, and it's our job, it's up to us to extend belonging, to offer belonging to our fellow students, to our fellow colleagues, from faculty to student, from staff to student, and vice versa, right? So how can I offer belonging to someone who's from a very different background from me? Well, I think that this ties back to this idea of a shared moral compass, right? A shared set of values. If our community's values are that we are interested in and excited to learn about community members who are different from us, right? If that's our value, then that's easy. I can extend and offer belonging by just being interested, not judgy, not prove yourself to me, that's something that, right? But like, wow, you're from this, whatever it is, religion, place of origin, I don't know what it might be. Tell me more. I feel embarrassed that I don't even know a single thing. Help me, right? Tell me more. But to be able to offer belonging simply by communicating in all the ways possible. I see you and I'm glad you're here. I value you. Thank you for bringing what you're bringing to the table. And tell me more. What is that? Tell me more about that. How can I know more about these wonderful things that you bring to the table for our community? So in that sense, right, we take the ownership of extending belonging, and I think it's easiest to do when we anchor it back like to identifying a value that our community has, or that we really want our community to have, and that we can foster from the ground up as well. And the other way that I could read that or hear that question is like, how do we help students have strategies for offering belonging to each other? And even when they're like roommates or their classmates or their, people they're interacting with are from a very different background from their own. And so one, we model it. And as I was just describing, and two, I think it doesn't hurt to remind students or explain to students how this works. A healthy community is one where members of that community engage with one another, interact with one another, and care about the well-being of the other person. Make that other person feel like, gosh, if you weren't here tomorrow, I would miss you.
That's great. Just looks like we've got a few more questions too.
Yep, so we had Maria and we had Allie. They both asked about students who don't live on campus. So Marie asked, in what ways can we help students who are completely online to feel connected? And Allie asked about building community with students who commute.
Yeah, this is so great. So it's the same concepts, right, about how we offer and extend belonging and what it means to feel like you belong. But there are different strategies when you don't have, so completely online, right? When you don't have face-to-face interaction, there are different strategies. But there are whole books written about like the way some of faculty members, so the way that faculty can design an online course with, a short welcome video instead of like welcome to class typed out on the Blackboard or LMS page or whatever it is, but a little welcome video to kind of personalize and humanize the instructor. Things like this, right, can help. Structuring in required opportunities for students to work together, discuss together, connect together, even though they might be completely online, and even asynchronously collaborating with one another. Building in these kinds of interactions where students have opportunities to learn about their classmates a little bit. In a remote class, for example, maybe not as easy asynchronously, although it's very possible. But I might put students in a breakout room to answer some discussion questions, but I'll tell them the first 3 minutes I don't want you to answer the questions. I want you to talk about yourself to each other. I want you to ask each other questions, right? I want you to spend 3 whole minutes building relationships with each other and sprinkling in these very intentional and explicit, like, I want you to do this because I want you to know the people in this class. That's why this part of this assignment requires you to interview 4 people in order to, like, whatever, answer the last question of the assignment or something like this. So yeah, my work really focused, so the research and the data points that I have really focus on campus in-person communities, and they're different strategies, but there's not an absence of strategies to try to accomplish this with students who are on campus less because they commute or completely online. Yeah, it takes sometimes some creative thinking about how, like, what is it that I can do to connect people, to make my students feel like it matters to me if they're there this week or not.
Very good. Jess, any other questions in the chat?
Yes, we had a follow-up to that question. Amy asks, to follow up on those commuter and online students, we're a 2-year, so we struggle to build community in the short time that students are here. So what would you recommend to folks like Amy who are working on crunch time?
Yeah. So a couple of things. One, just like thinking about the first 2 years, all of the research these interviews that I did, the research that I did were on 4-year residential campuses. So that is where most of my data and ideas are coming from, right? But what I can say, even from those experiences, that within those first 2 years talking to students, they built enormous networks of friendships, and not every single one student gets an enormous network of friendships, of course, but right, there's a lot of engagement with clubs and orgs, and engagement with academics, and engagement with friends. And that looks different when it's not a residential campus, when there aren't dormitories where people are living and sleeping and breathing and eating and studying and doing everything else in shared spaces. So the strategies have to start with what you know about your own campus and what you know about the students who attend, and not just dreaming up the kinds of groups or like Thursday night trivia nights or whatever it is, right? Dreaming up these kinds of opportunities for students to gather, and maybe even incentives for students to gather, such as, I don't know, organized trivia night back to back with a, I don't know, calculus 150 study exam night or something, right? But to dream them up, but also to really ask students, what is it that you need? And yeah, commuter students on a 2-year campus have different needs than the kinds of students that I talk to a whole bunch. So yeah.
Very good. Well, good. Well, we're definitely going to go through another round of questions, so please put those into chat. But continuing the conversation, so I've seen this in your research, but I've also heard inklings of it today. Your framework has 3 areas of belonging. So you've got social, campus community, and academic belonging. I would imagine for academic belonging, fairly simple to measure quantitatively. We can look at grades, we can look at attendance, add drop, things like that. But is there a way for us to measure that for social and campus community belonging?
Yeah. So I think campuses already do this pretty systematically with surveys. And I think surveys get us some information, right? You know, you simply ask students, and there's usually a Likert scale. And they answer questions about belonging and finding friends and finding orgs. So I think some of this work can be accomplished with surveys. I'm a qualitative sociologist, so I always lean into the rich and complicated understandings when you just sit down and listen to students talk. And that's a lot more time consuming and a lot more expensive. So it's not, it's probably not a method that schools can readily adopt. But the point of it is you have to ask them. And I would say the same thing for academic belonging. There are students, you know, with a 3.85 GPA who feel like they're failing because they have this idea about what they need to accomplish in order to get into graduate school. And their academic belonging is really fragile. Even though if we look at their GPA, we would think, no, of course not. They're doing great, right? They're doing great. But we have to ask them how they feel. And start there.
Mhm.
And that I think is true for all of the realms, but I do think it's meaningful. So I didn't just come up with these ideas of the three realms. I mean, most of the time in the literature, the scholarship on belonging, it's really centered on social belonging. And that's not to say that no one talks about, Vincent Tinto famously talks about like academic and social, right? Having both of these pieces, but thinking about academic belonging as separate and distinct, but also a little overlapping with social belonging as separate and distinct, but also overlapping with campus community belonging, right? All three of these things at the same time. That came out of listening to students talk about belonging. And I just asked them if they feel like they belong at their institution. And then what does that mean to you? When you hear that word belonging, when you say that word belonging, what does that mean? What comes into your mind? And they talked about these things separately. So I think they're worth measuring separately. And I think that they're worth thinking about separately, because I sort of assumed once, you know, that piece crystallized that there were these, they talked about them in three realms, that once a student's sense of belonging kind of got going, once the engine of that kind of got revving in any of those areas, that the other elements, the other realms of belonging would kind of, you know, also fill out, would also click into place. And that just was not true for the students in my study. I mean, for some, you started out and like built their belonging slowly but surely over time. And over time, all three realms kind of bloomed. But for lots of students, you know, they maybe had a strong sense of social belonging because they had this really great group of friends, but not campus community belonging, because as they walked around camp, they just did not feel at home or valued at all. And this happened more often with students of color. Both of these were predominantly white institutions that I studied, and also first generation students who just felt out of place navigating their campus spaces. And then someone might have academic belonging, but not the other two, right? They worked independently of one another, and they also shifted around a lot more than I would have expected. In one semester, this and that, this one and that one are strong. The next semester, those two are weak, but this other one is strong, right? Some people just had roller coasters of shifting dynamics of belonging. And I found that surprising based on what I had read and understood and thought that I had witnessed as a faculty member on a campus for all these years. I can't even remember what your original question was now, Mike, but that's fair. You can remind me if I didn't hit it.
No, I think you did. We were talking about measuring the various
Mm-hmm.
aspects of belonging. So I think that's fantastic. Yeah. And it's interesting. I would think they were very interrelated, right? So if I'm struggling in class, it might relate to me being a social butterfly and being Ferris Bueller and being everybody's friend and maybe not studying as much, or vice versa, that maybe I'm studying so much that I'm missing out on some opportunities to be around people. But that's interesting that you said they were kind of independent variables.
Yeah. Yeah. Part of that is connected to the campus culture, right? Some of the importance of understanding belonging lies in understanding that the dynamics and the expectations on your own campus. And so at one of the schools in my study, the culture, the climate there, the campus climate was very much academics are the priority.
Mhm.
And so that lent itself to a different kind of relationship to academic belonging. It was a little harder one, and social, like a lot of students felt like they should be sloughing off opportunities to socialize with friends because they should be diving deep in academics, but that didn't necessarily build their academic belonging. It just added to their insecurity about whether they were getting good enough grades or whether they were going to successfully be able to claim that major that they were aiming for that's highly impacted, yada, yada. So even though I might be devoting myself to academics on a campus where that's the expectation, I may still feel a very low sense of belonging in that academic realm. So it's so multi-layered. Yeah.
Makes total sense. So we had a question about, if the clock sort of runs out on the student experience, or if a student doesn't experience a sense of belonging in their time at an institution, what's the impact on the student? And then what ends up happening with the institution down the road as well?
Yeah. I would love to do a study just on this exactly, right? Talking to alums, to graduates of institutions, and hearing about their emotional relationship with their institution a few years out. But let me stick to what I do know. I don't think the clock runs out. Absolutely not. Belonging shifts dramatically, changes over time. It moves up, it moves down, it gets bigger, it gets smaller in all three of these realms. So there is always an opportunity to make someone feel included and at home and a part of things. So that's, I think, good news. It's a little harder one if that student has spent a few years feeling resentful of the institution, maybe resentful of the faculty who just can't seem to care enough. That this is how students describe it, right? Faculty who just don't seem to care enough about their students to make sure that they're learning. And I'm struggling over here, I'm struggling, but I'm trying my hardest, and that faculty member just does not care. And right, and that you get enough of that in your semesters, and that gets hard to bridge, right? That gets hard, that resentment builds up. And so I'm not saying that it's easy to try to finally embrace students into the campus community at a later moment, but it's absolutely possible. And sometimes, so sticking with academic belonging, sometimes it is that one class, that one professor. It's like, oh yeah, yep. Yeah, I picked the right major. I'm in the right place. This is who I am. And all of a sudden, right? So no, it's never too late. And it's never too late for a campus to do things and offer things and paint the right mural or play the right music in the cafeteria that finally this campus seems like it's reflecting who I am and where I'm from and what I'm all about and what I want to do and who I want to be, right? It's never too late to make shifts and changes that honor and reflect and respect the identities of the students that make up the entire student body. So I don't think it's ever too late. What happens to an institution when it doesn't? I think they struggle to retain folks, right? And I think that they struggle to, and I don't just mean students, I mean faculty and staff and everyone. When a campus is able to feel like a coherent community where I feel like, as a faculty member, as a staff member, as a student, where I feel like I'm a part of things, that makes people want to stick around. It makes people want to invest themselves in the place.
Thank you. Yeah. And it's interesting. I did not think about, when we talked about belonging, I didn't think of the faculty and staff aspect, but that makes a lot of sense. And when you think about where institutions are in terms of staffing, sometimes institutions might get a little lax with the onboarding and explaining what those values are at institutions. And it's easy for somebody to maybe lose sight of those things. So that's great insight. Thank you. Now, I didn't want to go to audience questions, but I saw a fantastic one. I think this is a good opportunity. So Ashanti asked a question here. Jess, do you mind reading it for us?
Sure. So Ashanti works with a student service that supports the first generation student population. They believe that they inherently belong by holding that identity, but they're not seeing the numbers that they are hoping for. So how can they integrate them into the space that they've curated for them? And also, how do they convey the joy and excitement that these students are trailblazers, especially when they're wrestling with their first generation identity?
Yeah. This is so great. And I just want to say, like, how heartening it is to even just hear such a question, right? To recognize how many folks on so many campuses, Ashanti in particular, are just like what can we do, right? We want to build first gen's students' success and futures, and how do we do it? So I do have a few ideas, but the first idea, if you've got great, there's a space already. And if you're not getting the participation that you hope for, start really systematically asking students, like ask them, do you come here? Okay, why don't you come here? Okay, well, what would, ask them for ideas. And they're not going to be able to dream up all of their own solutions, but you can listen to what they have to say and then, build up from there, try new things, new kinds of events, new kinds of incentives, new kinds of offerings, see what sticks for the students at your school, but also talk to them, ask them what's going on, what's going right, and what would make this useful to you, and then do that thing. A lot of times, I'm not at all implying that I know anything about Ashanti Center or how you go about it, but a lot of times, I'm thinking about my own campus in particular, we design this thing and we just know it's going to be the great, and we're doing all the things that all the books said to do, and we roll it out, and then we're really mad that students aren't taking advantage of it. And we can't believe that they're not showing up. And we try really hard to convince them to like this thing that we have built, instead of asking them, what can we change about it to actually making it appealing to you? Not you change, right? Instead of asking the student to change their mind or change their habits or change their preferences or whatever it is, not asking the student change, but what can we change about this to actually make it something that you would find useful and meaningful? So, a little bit of that, but yeah, talking to students, being flexible, making sure that you're serving them.
That's great. And there's a comment that came in. Sorry, Jess, I'm going to step on your toes here. This is from Christopher Moderson. My apologies. If anyone's sensitive about last names, it should be me. I work at a career college where we have students for as little as 6 months. To create the culture of inclusion, we develop specific activities to create the sense of belonging, i.e. field trips specific to their program, and more generally, community and volunteer service at homeless shelters, food banks, etc. We hold mock clinics or salon days where students in different programs serve as patients one day and then as clients on another day. We do it around food, i.e. food trucks, potlucks. I love that. It's fantastic. I love the co-curricular nature of that as well, which is great. Very good.
Yeah.
Well, good. Now one of the topics that we seem to explore a lot in this series, and I've heard an interplay of it a little bit today, is the role that off-campus forces, whether it be family, friends, play on the student experience. So what role do family and friends play on a student's sense of belonging in your experience, Lisa?
Yeah, that's such a great question. It's another opportunity to think about how complex and multi-layered the human experience is. And thinking about sense of belonging for college students, we think about it being bounded by the campus. And of course, in many ways, it is, then we should conceptualize it that way, but it's absolutely affected by all of the other communities that we're a part of in our lives. And so if I've got a family community that is all about my thriving in college, however they define thriving, right? Then they're going to support that and make things maybe smooth the way, make things easier for me in certain ways. And, maybe that's a family that has the financial means to give me an allowance so that I can go and do all the fun things that my friends on campus want to do. Or maybe it's the kind of family that really doubles down on the academics, and so are finding ways for me to feel like I'm successful and competent in my classes, whether that's private tutoring or maybe it's my mom reading my English essays before I turn them in and giving me some advice, right? Students, both of those examples would be more typically continuing generation students have told me about some of these things. But then I also might have a family, it could be church, it could be neighborhood, it could be a set of friends from high school or from my hometown that could either help encourage me to invest myself in my college experience and my college community, or they could be really putting pressure on me to invest in the family community or the church community or the friendship community, right? And drawing me away from investing in the campus community. So different students are going to experience this differently. In my interviews, first gen students, not all of them, but many of them grappled with these competing priorities and commitments between their family obligations and duties and, joyful obligations, many of them, helping take care of younger siblings, helping ensure that the family household runs the way that it's supposed to. But having to split their time and energy between investing in their college lives and investing in their family lives, their domestic lives. So I mean, it's a very simple answer, but it matters a lot, right? How do these off-campus communities matter for a sense of belonging? They matter a lot. And again, my research points to first generation students, typically, not everyone, but typically having a more, I don't want to say conflicted, it's not conflicted, but a more split or bifurcated set of priorities and commitments that might prevent them from investing as heavily in the campus community, whereas continuing gen students, more often their families and their hometowns and their other, high school friends, all of them had this attitude that supported the idea that, like, you're in college, your job is to be in college, your whole thing, you do college right now, go in 100%.
Nice. Good. We have a few audience comments, which I want to get to in a second, especially because we're running low on time. But I'd be curious. There can be sometimes a dilemma between a larger institutional identity, sense of belonging, and maybe individual small groups, and sometimes they come in conflict. But my bigger fear would be that institutions might co-opt smaller groups, smaller identities for their end purposes. Do you find that is true? And if so, how can institutions tap into those smaller senses of belonging, those smaller communities, without co-opting them?
Yeah. Well, first I'll say that if a student is dialed into a smaller community, perhaps an identity-based group of some kind on campus, that might sustain them and meet their belonging needs in a way where they're going to survive, maybe even thrive in college, even if there's some distrust of the larger campus community, even if they feel like that university is maybe trying to co-opt, trying to use us, or you can make it through college, you can be successful, graduate, have a great GPA, right, do all the things, even without having your belonging needs met in all the realms. That's good news and bad news, right? I mean, it's good news that, like, students can make it, even if they feel like this institution doesn't really care about them. But we want to minimize that, right? We want to minimize that as much as possible. And we want students to feel like the institution does care about them. And this idea of co-opting, I think part of it, right, there's so many pieces. I'm trying to figure out how to focus on one part to talk about, but I think part of it is creating structures where students can both join existing things that are already off the ground, existing organizations, existing resource centers that are already off the ground, they don't have to do anything, but then also make it really easy for students to change or modify or adapt those groups, or start a new, like, little subgroup within that group in ways that are just minimal obstacles, that the student doesn't feel like they have to fight against the system in order to get their center or their favorite place to really reflect who they are and who this group of students is and what they need, to just minimize the hassles of allowing students to say what they need and what they want and make those changes happen.
Very good. And I wanted to read a comment from Sarah. She mentions, I've seen good support for commuters at my alma mater, not my current institution. They have a commuter website with parking, study space, ideas, etc. They also have a commuter lounge with tables, chairs, microwave, refrigerator, lockers, charging station, Keurig, which she notes is very important, and it creates community. So love that. I wanted to call that out. So we are running low on time. So if you have any final questions for Dr. Nunn, please, please put those into the chat or feel free to ask on camera. But Lisa, are there any key takeaways you'd want the folks who were with us today to go back to their campuses with?
Yeah. So some of the key highlights is that like belonging isn't monolithic. It doesn't just, it doesn't just happen for one group, nor does it automatically grow. If you're feeling great in your classes, it doesn't automatically mean you're going to feel great and like you're a part of the campus community, if we just give it enough time. No, there are these three realms and it shifts around a lot. So it's just not automatic. And yeah, as you talked about before, like, orientation, pre-O, welcome weekend, homecoming, these are like key moments to like celebrate making connections and building community, but that's not the whole story, right? Like we need to do our best in those important moments, but then also be sure that we're paying attention to thinking hard about whether or not our students' belonging needs are being met at lots of different moments along the way and in all three of these realms. And one that I only talked about a bit, but I wrote a whole book about is that faculty need to be encouraged to do a lot more than we are typically asked to do on many institutions. Maybe your campus is already brilliantly bringing faculty into this work, but at many institutions, my own included, there's just a lot more that faculty can do and I would argue should do to be a good community member, right? We are the academic community to extend and offer belonging to our students in a way that's this reciprocal, relationshipy, we are both members of the same academic community kind of thing, not just here I am up here trying to make you feel welcome, right? That's a piece of it, but it's a two-way street.
If you took 3 of the 33 tips, like what would be like the top 3 that you're like, I want everybody to go home with these?
Oh my gosh, 3 of the 33 faculty tips, I think, okay, I'm just going to say the first 3 of my favorites that come to my head. So one is don't seem busy. Students told me that they really want to like try out a conversation with their faculty member, maybe before class starts or after, and they're just so intimidated. And we seem so busy and we seem like we're doing all this important work. And students even told me that they'll like walk by the open door of office hours, poke their head in, see the professor busy at their computer and just keep on walking because they just can't bear to interrupt the person, even though it's office hours. So all these ways to just stand still, be quiet, look available, maybe for 1 whole minute in front of students and just see what happens, right? Try not to seem so busy. And then, well, let me blend this with, I have so many strategies. I'm just gonna pull these out as well. At the last chapter of the College Belonging book, I have 9 strategies for campuses. So let me talk about one that kind of matches for both. And this is this idea of reaching out. So I encourage us to reach out, but also to reach in. And what I mean by the difference there is like, so as a faculty member, I might reach out to my students like, hey, there's this thing happening in the community. It's connected a little bit to what we're doing in class. Like, hey, here's the invitation, reaching out and like sharing an opportunity to do something. But reaching in is like, it's a little bit like meddling, but not meddling. It's a little bit like what those really invested continuing generation students' parents are doing, right? They're following up, they're touching and they're reaching in like, hey, you got a D on that midterm. How we doing? What can we do to make you feel confident for the next one coming up, right? I know this about you, whatever it is. I know you've got this contentious roommate thing going on. I know you've got this financial aid package that just got pulled out from under you, switched at the last second a couple weeks ago. Let me reach in. How's that going? And what can I do? Not expecting students to problem solve on their own, or even expecting them to reach out for help to problem solve. But us, I know this has got to be hard. I know this fact about you. I'm going to reach in and just check in with you about it. So institutions can do that. Faculty can do that. Have I talked too long?
No, I think we're over time, but this is a fantastic conversation. If folks do have to head off, and I'm actually one of them that will have to head off here in a second, but if folks want to stay in touch with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Email me.
Okay.
Sadly, I'm on email all the time, but gladly I will answer something as interesting as a comment or a question or a connection or follow-up from you. So I think, oh, good. It's already dropped in the chat there. Yeah, my san diego.edu email.
Very good. Well, Lisa, thank you so much for joining us. Everyone who is on today, thank you so much for joining us live. We really appreciate it. To echo what Dr. Nunn mentioned, it's important that you're part of this community. So our next episode, July 5th, day after the 4th of July, same time, same place. We'll host Ashley Budd. And remember, if you can't make it, you'll be missed. You belong, as part of this community. So we'd love to have you attend again. And as I mentioned too at the beginning, if you would like to send any stickers, swag, etc., please feel free to do that. I know the address is in the chat, but it's also on the screen here too. So 6506 East Quaker, Suite 202, Orchard Park, New York. But again, Dr. Nunn, thank you so much for joining. Thank you everyone who participated today. Have a great rest of your week, and thank you for joining.
Thank you. I'm really loving all of those, all that gratitude in the chat. I appreciate you saying so. Thanks.
All right. See you in a couple weeks, everyone. Thank you so much.